Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to another conversation from the WECT Digital Studio. I'm Scott Pachillis, and today I am joined by the one and only Donna Washington. Donna, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you so much for doing this. The reason that I wanted to ask you here today is that you were recently involved in a video game release that came out this month called South of Midnight. And I want to talk about that. I'm very excited to talk about that. But before we jump into the video game, I wanted to let people know more about you. When I looked you up and it said Donna Washington, storyteller. And I just thought that was so interesting. I'd never met someone whose sole profession was storytelling. So if you wouldn't mind, how do you describe yourself to others when they ask you what it is you do as a storyteller, as your profession?
Well, I have been a professional storyteller for 37 years. So this is the only job I have ever had as a grown-up person. And I graduated from Northwestern University. And basically, what a storyteller does is I travel around all over the world and I tell people stories. I don't use props. I don't use the book. I don't have any support, as it would be, except for what's in my head. And the actual definition of what true storytelling is that the audience and the storyteller are in the same space at the same time, such that as the storyteller tells the story, the audience receives it and the story transforms the audience. And then their feedback loop that comes back to the storyteller transforms the storyteller. So every performance that you encounter with a live performer who's a storyteller will be different.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell the same story, but it will be slightly different with a slightly different audience. And the tools you use, your voice, your eyes, your face, your gesture. So it is a I'm a minimalist storyteller. I don't use, like I said, puppets or properties or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that it is a completely interactive experience with an audience.
Do you know when you first realized that this was going to be your calling, your one passion in life, that this is what you wanted to do as a profession? Or how did you come to that realization that storytelling was even something that you could do as an adult? Can you talk about that?
Well, yes. So I went to Northwestern University, which is right outside of Chicago, and I was studying theater. And while I was there, it was in the 80s, and I don't sing and I don't dance. So as a black performer in the 80s, I was like, how many revivals of Raisin in the Sun am I really going to do if I do theater? I'm straight plays, and it was before Oprah had sort of taken off, and more roles were available for black performers, and I just didn't know what I was going to do. And I did a piece of theater while I was at Northwestern where I had to pretend to be a storyteller. You know, I had to take a class about what kind of art it is, how you're supposed to do it. And I did the show with an ensemble. And when it was over, one of the professors walked up to me and said, you should really be a storyteller. And I was 20 nothing, so I said, okay. And his name was Reeves Collins. And Dr. Collins basically took me under his wing and signed me up for graduate student classes when I was an undergrad, which kind of freaked me out a little bit. And I took these classes. And then one day he said to me, you know what? I have a show, I have a gig. Come and do half, and I'll give you half the cash. And I thought, how much money could you really make being a storyteller? I mean, I'll get 20 bucks or something. So I go, I tell for 20 minutes, and I got 150 bucks. And I thought, you could do this for a living. And so the last year and a half I was in school, I just really focused on storytelling, which I really enjoyed doing. And I traded storytelling for access to kids for some research programs that I was doing while I was at school. And then by the time I graduated from Northwestern, everybody just knew I was a storyteller. And I lived at the perfect moment in the Chicago area. There was a national storytelling festival that happened there, run by a man named Jim May. Some of the biggest names in storytelling just happened to live within 5 miles of where I lived. And so I was mentored by these amazing performers. And over the next few years, it's just what I did. I just told stories. And I'm still at it 37 years later.
That's incredible. I mean, God bless all those college professors out there that send us down the right path. I was on a similar trajectory where I did not know what I wanted to do, and I was lucky enough to have a professor that was like, you're clearly a television like nerd, and you know about stuff that no one should know about. You should probably consider a career in television, if even television production. And it's just something that I had never thought of. And it's one of those things where when you look back as an adult after years of your doing your own profession and your own career, you start to realize like it's so obvious. Why didn't I see it beforehand? But so thank goodness for those college professors that send us down the right path in life.
Yes.
So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is basically like you were saying, the art of storytelling and how you go about it. As I was telling you before we started recording, this is only my second interview. My first interview was with a stand-up comedian who also works as a writer on The Tonight Show. And I wanted to ask you if you see a sort of parallel, if you could bridge those two careers together, because I was wondering, in the same way that a stand-up comedian would workshop his material and go through a certain act, do you find yourself doing that with your stories? Because again, you're doing such a performance and you're adding things and you're judging audience reactions and participation. So is there a similarity, would you say, between storytelling and stand-up comedy as far as the craft and workshopping it to like a certain degree?
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of similarities, but there are also a ton of differences.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily have to be funny when I'm performing.
But you
So
are. I've watched a couple videos and you do.
I can be funny,
You can be.
but it's not required, obviously. Um, the the idea behind storytelling and stand-up comedy, they're a little different. Like in stand-up comedy, the person who's doing the comedy is in the frame. Like they're telling the story, they're there, you're commiserating with them, laughing at them and at yourself, because that's kind of what comedy allows you to do, right? It's to look at the absurd, or look at the normal and then go, isn't this kind of absurd? Or look at the absurd and go, we all do this. So you're connecting on a like a one-to-one kind of experience with a stand-up comedian, and they're right in the middle of the frame. Storytelling is different because if you do it right, the storyteller should disappear, and you're just living in the story. So the story should be front and center, and the storyteller is, well, irrelevant in some kind of interesting way. You're just living in the story. So it's not about the storyteller, it's about the story. In comedy, it's about the comedian. So an example would be that just happened to me. I was out in Charlotte, and I was busy telling stories to kids, and I'm a barefoot storyteller. So I take my shoes off when I tell stories. It's just a grounding thing for me. And there was a woman there who, her name was Caitlin. She works for the library, and she was there taking pictures. And as soon as I took my shoes off, she had a moment. And then after it was over, she walked up and she says, "You told me stories when I was in fourth grade." And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes, but I didn't realize it until you took your shoes off. I have spent my life with your voice in my head, doing Peter Piper picked a purple pickled peppers. So I love language because of those tongue twisters. And I didn't realize it was you until you took your shoes off and stood up." And she said, "I have goosebumps. I remember you now, but I had been remembering only your voice up until now." And that is the power of storytelling. I have so many stories like that where people don't realize, they meet me as an adult and don't realize I told them stories until I turn a certain way or say something, and they go, "I do remember you now," but up until then, they just remembered the stories.
That is an incredible interaction. That has to make all those years worth it to get. That's a great story. Um, I you have so many videos online depicting your storytelling from various sources. I wanted to make sure that I was able to watch one before our interview today, and it happened at the last minute. I worked the overnight shift at this station, so in the middle of the night, around like 1 a.m. earlier today, I saw a video that featured you telling ghost stories, and that was the title. And another reason that I clicked it was it said it was in Charleston, and me and my wife used to live in Charleston and work at a TV station there between 2016 and 2018. So this recording was 2013, so it's a little bit earlier, but I was like, let me give this a shot. And as a storyteller, I'm sure you've seen enough audiences where there are some people you have to win over. Some people are there on board from the beginning. Others, it's a harder sell. I definitely fall into the harder sell camp only because for me, it is so hard to read fiction because it's my voice as the narrator, and I hate the sound of my own voice. I don't want to. I want to lose myself in a story, and all I can hear is myself narrating. So it's really hard. I love nonfiction books. I love going down like factual rabbit holes. But there's something about fiction that I have a hard time staying with. So when I clicked on this video, and the name of the story is called "The Lover's Promise." And one thing I did not realize, you say at the beginning of the video, but it wasn't until the end that I realized, is The Lover's Promise, did your son write this story?
He did.
He did.
He was 10 years old.
Which is crazy, because this is a 30-minute story, more or less. And before you mentioned that it was your son who had wrote it, again, basically, spoiler alert, you had won me over. I couldn't believe how fast the 30 minutes passed. I was so into this ghost story, and I was wondering its origins. I was like, where could this come from? This is a classic, like, pitch perfect ghost story. And then you mentioned that it was written by your son. So clearly it's in the family genes. Clearly he's picked up whatever you have. Can you talk a bit about what it is, what it's like reading stories that you've written, stories that your son written, and how that compares to stories that have been around for centuries and centuries?
Well, the thing that I have to say about my son is that he grew up in a household hearing stories, obviously. Both my kids did. They grew up in, there's so many stories that I've told. And they've heard other people tell, like when they were little, they came to festivals. So they know traditional forms of story. So when my son put that story together, understand that he was 10 years old, but he had already all of his life been exposed to traditional material. So the thing that makes a story survive over time, the form, it has to do with the way that it's put together, obviously. The way the repetitions happen, the way the story builds, how it comes to its highest points crescendo, and as it moves down into the end of the story. So if you understand how traditional material is put together, you can put stories together that sound like traditional material. So that is a thing that my son is able to do, mostly just because he grew up hearing stories. As for me, I am also someone who grew up hearing stories, but slightly different. I had a portable record player when I was a kid, and my mother just bought us nothing but story records. I didn't have any, pop music or anything like that when I was a kid. Mostly they were just recordings of people telling stories. I did the Let's Pretend series. The Disney used to put out records. There was a company called Peter Pan Records, and they just put out stories for kids. And so I had a huge collection of story records. And I would just walk somewhere in the house and plug my record player in and put it on. And my brothers and sisters would come, and we'd all just sit on the floor listening to stories. So I don't hear my own voice when I'm listening to stories. I hear the characters' voices, and I hear like whatever narration needs to happen, and I hear all the sounds. I don't even know how to explain that, but inside my head there's an entire world going on that I'm just watching. So one of the craziest things is I do this story called Sodi Saluratus, and I become different characters as I'm on my way to a grocery store. And sodium salurated is just baking soda. And so they do this little chanty thing that they're doing as they go to the store. And when I turn into the little girl character and I'm heading out there, she closes her eyes as she sings this little song. It goes, Sody, Sody, Sody saluratus. And she's just going down the road. But when I close my eyes, I'm actually going down a road. Like I can see the road, and it's like perfectly good morning and butterflies everywhere. And the kids I'm telling to are also chanting this little thing with me. And at the end of her little chant, she opens her eyes. And I've been telling this story for upwards of like 27 years. Every time I open my eyes, I'm always shocked that I'm not on a road. I know it's going to happen. I'm prepared for it, and it still gets me every single time that I'm not actually standing in front of a lot of children in an auditorium or a gym or somewhere. Because in my head, the story is very real. And I store stories as pictures and movies, not as words. So as I'm telling a story, I'm watching the story, and I'm just describing to you what I see in my head. So I don't even have a voice in there. I just have images and different kinds of sounds.
Wow. You must be a fantastic dinner party guest. Right? I mean, does that happen? Do people ask you to tell stories? And is that something that you're into, like, when you're, let's say off the clock? Or is that something you're like, guys, enough stories?
Well, I don't encourage people to ask me to tell stories at dinner parties.
Yeah.
Because it's more interesting to me to hear other people's stories. I mean, I get to hear myself tell stories all the time. And
Yeah.
yet I do some of that at dinner parties, but it's my job.
Hmm.
It's like you don't go to like invite your dentist over for dinner and they're like, "Can you look at my teeth?"
Hmm.
You don't do
Right.
that.
Okay.
So I do some storytelling, but like just normal discussion stuff. I don't break out the thing and yeah, except for when I'm with family. Occasionally they're like, "Will you tell us a story?" And then we get into it. So
Okay. Um, So the reason again that I wanted to have you here specifically around this time was the release of South of Midnight. It is a major first-party release from Xbox and Microsoft, and you had a part in the creation. And I wanted to just take me back from the beginning. Well, first off, I want to ask, what is your history with video games in general?
well, I haven't got any.
Okay.
None. Um, uh, I loved to play some video games when I was younger. Riven, I loved Riven when it came out. Um, that those kind of games I really enjoyed. But not a big video game person per se. I didn't grow up with them, and I have a few apps on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
But I got a phone call from Compulsion Games, and they told, well, actually, they talked to my husband because he's my business manager. I don't do anything unless he says I can. But Compulsion Games called, and they said that they were looking to do a game based around Southern folklore. And I guess they simply Googled different storytellers, and I came up, and they watched my stuff and thought, okay, let's have her come up. And so he said, we would like to come and talk to us about Southern folklore. So I was like, okay. So they flew me out to Montreal, and I met with they hadn't really started anything. They were still talking about what they were going to do. And so I came in and I talked about various elements of Southern folklore. And I told them a number of stories, examples of different kinds of folklore, and some of the characters that they would possibly connect with, and talked about how the magic and the lore worked in different parts of the South. And then I did an hour-long performance for the teams, for the creative teams, for the people who were, drawing the characters and all that sort of thing. So I came in and I did an hour, which they recorded. And the thing that I really wanted them to focus on was that if you're going to do stories that come out of these various cultures, you have to honor the cultures they come out of. Do not take the stories and just mess with them to the point where they no longer have any reflection on the cultures that they come out of. And you also don't want to, what's the best way to say this? Take characters that have a particular purpose and then put them in situations where now they're sort of commenting back on the culture. An example of that would be Brer Rabbit stories. Brer Rabbit stories are amazing, but when Disney did Sound of the South or Song of the South, they didn't understand what those stories were about, and the way that they presented those stories makes people think that something is wrong with Brer Rabbit stories, like Brer Rabbit stories are racist or something. But the problem is Disney didn't know what they were doing with those stories. And I mean, how could they have? They got the stories from Joel Chandler Harris's estate, and the people who were presenting the stories to Disney didn't know what those stories were about. So it causes all sorts of, cultural misunderstanding. So I was really hoping that as they put the video game together, that they would use the stories in a way that sort of lifted up the culture of storytelling. And what's interesting is, I spent like 3 days with them, told the stories, they got me on video talking about them and performing, and then I didn't hear anything for a really long time, because that's how that works. And then they released the first trailer, and they let me know the trailer had dropped, and I saw it, and I was like, it feels like me telling a story. Like, it feels like storytelling. And my daughter saw it and said, Mom, the second I saw it, I felt like I was in one of your stories. So that was really cool. I mean, they did a great job of really making it feel like storytelling.
Yeah.
And since then, I've had a chance to hang out with some of the creators, and just really enjoyed listening to them talk about how important it was to keep the feel of the stories alive. And I think they did a great job based on the trailers I've seen. And my daughter has an Xbox, and she's like, I'm going to play this game, and I will do a playthrough, and you can watch it. So I'm going to get to watch a playthrough.
Oh, awesome. It is a trip. I have been playing it a lot over the last day or so in preparation for this interview, and it is a fantastic love letter to the South. I can say that much. So I wanted to ask you, when you're in Montreal and you're doing your storytelling, can you also talk about, so you get such a joy out of storytelling. What is it like to have, there's the storytelling, and then there's like the Q&A afterwards, because you have these artists that their intent is to make this game, and they want to be as accurate as possible. They want to be faithful to the material as possible. So what was that experience like, being able to basically have a bunch of people, you tell your story, and then they want to go dig deeper down the rabbit hole. They want specifics. Is that the type of thing that just, lit up your eyes as something that maybe you don't get to normally do? And, because this is your passion, you yes, I will love to go deeper down the rabbit hole, please. Is that what it was like?
Well, so it was actually backwards, because
Okay.
I came in and talked to them for 2.5 days about this before they watched me perform.
Oh.
So we did the workshop portion of it first. So I got to meet with each of the different creative teams and talk about, and they asked questions like, what does this look like? Why are these stories like this? Where do they come from? Do you know anything about this character? And I was like, that character is not out of the African American tradition. It's part of Native American tradition, and there are some crossovers. Just make sure that if you're going to use characters that come out of these different traditions, that you check with someone from that area who knows about where those traditions come from. I'm not going to be able to, if you're going to go into one community and tell about this particular character, find out about the character before you do anything to it. So we talked about how to honor the characters, honor the various stories that came out of the folklore. We talked about the kinds of characters you encounter, what they're called, the difference between hoodoo and what a haint is, and all this other kind of stuff. So we talked about all of this stuff prior to me doing the performance. So I talked about the swamp stories and this history of African Americans fleeing into the swamps, and why some of their stories present as they do, and where these characters came from and what they were about, and that these stories are all about survival. They're all about surviving really difficult things. And also, the folklore that comes out of creating bigger than life characters out of normal things. So we talked about all of that kind of stuff. And they all had questions, because there were things they wanted to do that would make sense. And some of them they brought up, and I was like, these stories are about female empowerment. do not put a man in the center of them. Or these stories are about surviving something really desperate. You know, don't put a panacea over it so that it takes away from the survival. So we talked about that kind of stuff and what characters might work better and what might not work better. And then I did the performance. So the interesting thing was, after having talked about all of this for 3 days, when I finally did the performance, it's almost like you're just watching light bulbs go off in people's head, like, oh, that's why this, I see how all of this works. Because it's one thing to talk about stories, it's quite another to sit, well, as you found out when you were watching the video, to sit with a storyteller and hear how they just envelop you. And
Yeah.
I think the thing that is most important to understand is when you are watching a storyteller face to face, you aren't thinking about anything. You're just in the middle of a story, and your brain is just focused in on it. So after I tell a story, I often ask, are there any questions? And what I find is most people can't ask me questions because they're too busy sitting in the middle of a story. It's very hard to do that while you're sitting there. Later, you might come up with questions. So we had our sort of debrief, but mostly people just really enjoyed living in those stories. And they talked about how they could see how all the connections were made based on the workshop that we had done prior to the performance.
Yeah. What you describe is basically how I feel at the end of like a movie where, you know, the credits roll, everyone gets up and leaves. Well, it's like, well, wait a second. I kind of need a second to just sit here with it and just decompress like what I just experienced for the last 2 hours. So yeah, I'm not really like ready to hit that jump off point of like going down the rabbit hole. I need to sit with it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to talk more about South of Midnight and particularly the Southern Gothic atmosphere that the game is trying to capture. And one of the quotes that I believe art director on the game said that I thought has stuck out in my mind ever since I heard her say it was, everything you see is leaning on the weight of the past. And I thought that was such a great way to describe, you know, old Southern architecture that's possibly in decay, old Southern swamp areas where overgrowth is, nature is, taking over. I'll play a little bit of the atmosphere from the game, and if you just want to talk for me a second about what you find as a storyteller so appealing about Southern Gothic stories, atmosphere in general, and because clearly that's why you took on this project to be a consultant on South of Midnight. So I was just wondering, what is it about Southern Gothic that you find so appealing?
Well, so understanding the history of how you get somewhere, like understanding what you're standing on or how you got here is really, really important. And a lot of the stories that come out of the South, a lot of the feel that comes out of the South, my ancestors were part of that. And the stories that they created to live through the darkness or the fear or the uncertainty. The South, with its really wild environment, with its swamps, with its forests, if you've ever been down into like the bayou, and you can see how when people first came to the South, they're clearing things out and they're building their big manor houses, but the environment does not care what you build. It can take it apart really, really fast. So you can see that once sort of the enslavement ended, and you didn't have like this huge enforced workforce, you can see how the environment just came to take everything. It's not gentle, and people have learned to live with it. If you think about like Tom Sawyer, even Tom Sawyer and those stories, you still get the sense that, yeah, we built this stuff here, but the world itself around you is just trying to come and get it all the time. The South is beautiful. It's beautiful, but it is wild. And of course, we have the crazy animals, the big animals in the South, that you don't necessarily get up north. And you got great big old bugs down south. It's warm a lot of the time. There's just this sense of the wild outside coming in. The weather is crazy. Hurricanes, tornadoes. There is something just, I don't know, earthy and amazing about the South. And
Yeah.
you also move slower. There's a sense of everything moving slower. And so, I don't know, we live in the South, but if you go like down south, like Louisiana, or you
Mm-hmm.
go down to Alabama, it always feels like the world is trying to reclaim everything humans built all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that sense of like earthly power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm most attracted to when I tell stories about the South. And there's that sense of, again, surviving really difficult things. And music you hear that comes out of the South, the blues comes out of the South, um, jazz music, all of this. It's all about surviving and celebrating the survival. And so the stories that you get out of the South are the same way. And I feel very connected to my ancestral heritage when I tell stories that come out of the South.
Yeah. And when we talk about the South, we kind of just say, oh, it's the American South. But the South encapsulates so much. Like, even in the video we were showing of environments in the game, you do see mountainous regions that's more akin to the Appalachian we have in Western North Carolina. And then, of course, you do see the swampy areas that you get in the bayou of Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you just we'll get back to South of Midnight in a second, but real quick, I wanted to ask you, because you do so much storytelling, traveling on the road, do you ever pick stories that are specific to maybe a region you're visiting? Because I know when I was in college, I went to college in Pembroke, which is near Lumberton, which I think you performed at recently. And there, the big community is, the Native American heritage and the Lumbee tribe. And again, when I was in Charleston, another community that was near there was the Gullah Geechee of South Carolina. So and that's just two examples of like one part of the South. And there's so many different cultures with their own folklore and their own backstories. Do you try to cater to certain places that you perform at with your story selection?
Well, it depends entirely on where I'm going,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, um, and why they've hired me. Sometimes people hire me for particular kinds of stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I do not tell any Lumbee stories for the very reason that I'm not Lumbee. Um, People's cultural stories, and this is something we talked about actually when we were talking about South at Midnight. People's cultural stories belong to them in many ways. Native American stories are told for particular reasons, and you really should get permission from the people whose stories that they're sacred to before you tell them. So I don't know enough about Lumbee culture to know what stories are sacred to them and what stories are part of their sort of inimical part of their culture. I don't have that information. So I don't tell Lumbee stories. Now I know some because I know some Lumbee storytellers and I've heard Lumbee stories, but I would not tell their stories. In fact, I was actually asked by a school to do this and I explained I wouldn't. And I was telling the kids why I wouldn't do it. And one kid said, is there storyteller police? How would they even know if you're telling their stories? And the answer is, if you tell me a story about your grandmother, and I don't know your grandmother, and then next time I tell it to someone, I'm kind of making fun of your grandmother. I said, exactly. So if I don't know your grandmother, I won't tell her stories. And that's how I feel about different cultures. Now, in talking about telling stories that are part of an area, I can and have done stuff like that. So I'm often, when I work in Appalachia and in different parts of the South, I'm often in what I call homogenous communities. In other words, I am the color. And so I go in and I tell stories that probably their grandparents or great grandparents would have told in their communities. So there's a lot of jacktails that are part of the Appalachian community, but are also part of the European community. There are versions of Brer stories that are also part of different communities. Brer being a shortened form of the word brother, and all of these stories being African American stories. The number of stories that are shared across cultures, but might come out of a particular culture, there are plenty of them. And it's easy to figure out which ones are kind of being told where. You can, do some reading about where they come from. Wiley and the Hairy Man is a story that's claimed by Alabama. It's also claimed by Louisiana. And you can also hear versions of it here in North Carolina. So if I'm doing something with Wiley and the Hairy Man in a particular area, like maybe I'm in Alabama somewhere where I tell the story, you will have grown-ups going, oh my gosh, I remember this story, and kids going, how come you never told me that story? And so it's kind of fun to watch adults remember that they have heard these stories. So I do find stories that I think would be regional. But most of the time, even if they are regional, they are based on stories that are just part of the South.
Right. And speaking of the South, and speaking of folklore in particular, like something that we touched upon earlier was, this is a game where you are battling a lot of monsters, and it seems to be that a theme in folklore is, monsters being a manifestation of fear. So we're not just overcoming the monsters in the moment, we're overcoming our fear and propelling our protagonist forward in the story. Can you talk a little bit about, and again, I will play some footage from the video game while you talk about it, but particularly folklore, Southern folklore, and because what we'll see is a bunch of creatures, and particularly with the theme of folklore being that you will see creatures, but it's how the creature became to be the monster is normally this, the theme of folklore. And I just wanted to know if you could talk about that, just the themes of Southern folklore.
Well, I think just taking a step back, and not just Southern folklore, to
Yes.
understand that folklore is about, well, it's about the folk, right? It's about the little people, the people who are just trying to survive every day. Um, Folklore is about keeping the wolves out, right? We everything beyond the walls is dangerous. It's
Yes.
scary, it could eat you, make you ill. All of that stuff is out there. And it can sneak up on you. And then also in folklore, you're also worried about the people in power, right? If you're very poor, you know that someone with money can take things from you. If you're a person of color, you know that someone who is not of color can take things from you. So the stories are about surviving the wolves. You sit around the fire and you tell stories about how you overcame a thing. We can overcome something. We're stronger than that. But outside, all of the forces are dark and they're all scary. So, and that's everything from people to just Mother Nature. But here, around the campfire, while we're telling stories, we are powerful. We are going to overcome. We can face anything. And it's to give you strength, right? These stories are about giving you strength and letting you know that as dark as it is, there is someone out there, some greater power or strength that can help you. So we get together, we tell these stories, we survive the stories, we go, yay, we beat the evil thing. Yay, we overcame everything. We are powerful. And as I said before, the creatures in the swamp, the creatures out in the world, we even imbue them with more power, right? Because that big crocodile, I see him on the screen right now, that I guess what is three-toed Tom or something like that. He's huge, he's scary, he's powerful, but we defeated him. Um, the the hurricanes come, it's taken everything, but we survived. The wolf showed up at the door, and we had the ability to be rid of him. We did it. We are small. We're the folk, but we have the power to overcome anything. And that's what the stories are all about. Any kind of folklore, not just Southern folklore. All folklore is about that. It's about survival. and the celebration of surviving. Now, that's not always true. Sometimes the thing eats us.
Yes.
Sometimes the thing eats us. And when that happens, the stories become be careful,
Mm-hmm.
keep your eyes open, or you will be eaten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then bringing it back to the story, The Lover's Promise, that your son wrote, did not have a happy ending, if I remember correctly.
No,
No, it
no, it
did
did
not.
not. And by the way, he wrote that story on the way home from church, just
Oh,
so you know.
okay. That's nice. No, I have a 6-year-old son right now as well, and thankfully he does have his mother's imagination, which is something that I was like looking forward to because again she is an avid book reader. She loves fiction of all kinds, but she has a massive book collection. And when we were having our first child, I was really hope that he gets your imagination, and and it was one of those things where I can just look at him and I see the gears turning. And I'm just like, yep, it's all happening inside his head. I can tell.
Well, look, you watched Lover's Promise and you got a chance to soak in that story. So don't say you don't have an imagination. You just have to find something to trip it.
No, that's true. That's true. I think everyone just needs that push, and open yourself up to new forms of media, and you can be pleasantly surprised. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was a word that I personally had never heard before is cryptids. And these would be some of the creatures that we face in South of Midnight. And could you just give a brief definition? Because I don't know how many people were just unaware, uneducated like me. What are cryptids exactly?
Well, cryptids. Oh gosh, now see you put me on this. You should tell me. You're gonna ask me how do you
Oh,
define a cryptid?
I thought it would. For me, if I had to guess, I mean the generalization would be, it's a creature with, maybe a tragic past, maybe a Shakespearean downfall or something, something along those lines. At least from the
No, well,
monsters that I've encountered so far in the game.
well, so I think like Bigfoot is like a cryptid.
So I guess a
So it's
better
like a creature that people say exists,
yes.
but there's no proof,
Yes, somewhere in
right?
the
So
realm between being able to be proven and being just straight myth. Somewhere in that
right,
gray
right.
area.
So for instance, like an example would be just thinking about like let's say there's like a lake somewhere. Oh,
Uh-huh.
the Loch Ness monster would be a cryptid, sort of.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lake somewhere, and everyone's like, "Oh, there's like a 500-year-old carp that lives in this lake, and he's really hard to catch, and you can't catch him, and he bites your line through, and blah 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 blah." So there might be a big carp in that lake, but
Mm-hmm.
you would never be able to prove it's this thing. So in South of Midnight, they have like taken these stories about these potentially existing creatures, broadened them out. They've made them bigger. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that.
Uh,
I mean, it's yeah. So it's an animal that might exist. No, that probably doesn't exist, but people think it exists. Is that the best way to describe
no, pretty
it?
much. Well, this was going to be my segue into some of the creatures that we find in the game, and I was wondering, don't know how many of them you had a particular hand in educating the team on or not, but I just wanted to bring some of them up, and then we could just educate the viewers at home on who these creatures are. So first up, you mentioned them earlier. We got Two-Toed Tom. Tell me, tell me a little about Two-Toed Tom.
Well, he supposedly is this huge gator that exists somewhere in the South. He's like in this little community, and apparently he's like, fought like alligator wrestlers or whatever. He's only got two toes because he's heinous. He bites his way out of traps, and supposedly he's just this huge gator that's roaming around South. Now there are people who swear they've seen him. They swear he's alive. He's just this giant gator, but he's not that big. Like the thing on the screen that you see, he's not that big, but he's supposed this ancient giant gator. There are probably stories about him. I did not introduce them to Toad Tom.
Okay.
Um, they asked me, it's like, what about him? I was like, well, I've heard about him, sure, but I don't do those stories usually. Like, I don't tell his story. I'm sure there are storytellers that do. Um, what they really wanted with the game is they were looking for very specific characters,
Mm-hmm.
and they asked me about them. And some of them I knew, and some of them I didn't know. What they wanted to do was take these various cryptids and put them all in one story, because these guys don't all exist together. The ones that you see in the game, they're
Mm-hmm.
not all together. They're
Right.
from different parts of the South. And they have brought all of them together into this one game as an homage to all the various places in the South.
Okay. Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Um, yeah, because it's like you said that, when we're playing the video game and we see, we'll have levels that are set in the mountains and we'll have levels that are set in the swamp. And we know in reality there are hundreds of miles in between those two different geological like locations. But in this game, it's just a trip that way. So, yeah, and it's great because we can combine all these stories into one incredible storytelling experience.
And I think that's the beauty of this. Not that they have found all of these various cryptids that are part of the South, that are part of usually very regional stories, like Hugging Molly. Like they're part of regional stories that you might not ever have heard of if you didn't live in that area. And they have brought them into this game where people all over the world will see them and hopefully look them up and find out where they're from. I just think that's really cool.
So since you brought her up, I want to bring up Huggin' Molly, or at least how she's depicted in South of Midnight. So where I am in the game is I'm on chapter 6, and I had just found out that my mother has been potentially taken by Huggin' Molly. So I later today, after this interview, I will be on my way to visit Huggin' Molly herself. What should I be in for? Why don't you tell me?
Well, you should be okay because mostly she just scares children.
Uh huh. Well,
Ideally, Hugging Molly, her thing is that she grabs hold of you and she screams in your ears.
okay. So I should
So,
not play this around my 6-year-old son, is what you're saying.
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know what she's gonna do in the game. I haven't played the game,
Right.
so all of these cryptids, all these creatures they have are based on folklore, but they may do different stuff than what they normally do. Hugging Molly to me is I don't know I have no idea if she's an offshoot of La Llorona. La Llorona is from South America and also Mexico. And basically, the story of La Llorona is that her she was in love with a very wealthy man who had another family, and he basically, was with her part of the time. Then he was with his wife part of the time. And at one point, he and his wife come through the village where La Llorona lives, and she sees him, and he rebuffs her because, of course, he's with his wife. So La Llorona drowns her own children, a la Medea, and then she throws herself into the river. And so the story of La Llorona is she wanders up and down the riverbanks, wailing and weeping, and if children show up, she drowns them. So Hugging Molly to me is a kind of La Llorona character, but she's in the South. So there's very possible that there are some connections to those two characters.
I love that. I love that because again, these stories have been around for so long. It's just this melding pot where it just each generation. It's almost like cooking recipes where it's just like each variation, no matter where you travel, has like a little twist or put their own little flavor on it. I love that.
Which is why when you ask me if I tell regional stories, I can
Yeah.
say that I choose stories that I'm pretty sure would have been in that region, but are part of the South. And the version I'm going to tell is probably different than the version they heard in that area, but it will spark the memory of stories that they'd heard when they were younger, probably from grandparents.
Um, Before I let you go, one of the things I wanted to talk about was representation in video games. So we have a black female protagonist, which, in terms of video games, I can tell you is we are, as far as other forms of entertainment and movies and TVs, video games still behind the curve, still trying to catch up in the form of representation. So it's great to see a big budget game like this be anchored by a female protagonist. Something I wanted to talk to you about is a lot of the times when we talk about representation in video games, the conversation is representation of self and not so much representation of setting. And I wanted you to talk about can you describe what it must, what it's going to feel like for gamers and non-gamers alike to possibly see their upbringing put on screen, see the place that they grew up, where their childhood, where they have roots and their own stories. Can you speak to how important that, just as important as representation of self is in media, seeing your heritage, seeing your background, and seeing that representation in media? Can you speak to how powerful you think this is? Being this will be some people's like only chance to visit the American South, this through forms of interactive entertainment.
So let me back it up a little bit.
Okay.
Obviously I'm a black woman, I'm an African American woman. And when I was little, there weren't that many books that had black girls in them. And certainly they were not main characters in the story. And so I didn't see myself in books. Now, I love books, but I didn't see myself in books. I'm also an army brat. So I grew up all over the world. And I didn't see kids who looked like me living like that either. So I didn't feel like I was represented in most of the stories that I saw. And I certainly wasn't represented in most of the media I encountered as a kid. And it's almost like if you don't see yourself or the surroundings reflected back at you, you feel like somehow it's not real. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. Like there's no belonging to something. It is really wonderful to see the South depicted in this game. It is wonderful because it is something that people have, like, I don't know, people have different ideas about what the South is like. But a lot of the South is not like the big manor houses, right? People have this, like, maybe very static feel about what the South is. Like I said, the South is wild. It's beautiful. It's organic. You come out of your bedroom and there's a heron walking across your lawn. It is a really wonderful, amazing place. And I think that to have people from the South sharing that or having that being shared across the world, first of all, I think that's pretty amazing. I think it's cool. I think it's cool for video games in particular because you're reaching a group of people who wouldn't necessarily be watching the kind of movies they said in the South. You think about like it's always to me like they're doing murder mysteries, or or like they've lost something. But the way this thing is that it's drawn, the images that they're creating, absolutely beautiful. And it gives you a feel for the South that I don't know you get in a lot of different places. I personally just have watched the trailers and watched some of the playthrough, and it's just immersive environment. I'm over the moon for it, and I think that people all over the world would want to come visit, just to come see it, because it is amazing. And that you have a person of color walking through and encountering different elements of the South in different ways. That's really empowering. And it's not just empowering for, some girl who might be playing that game, but it lets you see someone who is a girl, a person of color, in power. And I think that's really important to see. You were talking about the fact that you don't necessarily believe that you have imagination, which I think you have a perfectly lovely imagination.
Oh, thank you.
But if you don't imagine out the world, it's hard to see things you've never seen before. So we just had a woman of color running for office, and people going, I don't know if I can see that. I don't know. I don't know how that will work. The more images we see of people who we often think of from marginalized communities, because she's also poor, right? Marginalized communities, marginalized genders, the way we look at the world. If we can't imagine something, it's hard for us to see it working. So, games like this, where you have someone who you don't think of nearly as a hero or a heroine, be a hero or a heroine, have power to change the world, makes it easier for us to take the next step and actually see someone like that have the power to change the world.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's all about inspiring the next generation,
Yes.
you know. Well, I think we're about to wrap up here. I want to thank you so much for your time today. Again, South of Midnight is out right now on Xbox consoles. Um, Again, I'm only a couple hours in, but I am having a great time so far. And then, really quick before we go, I did want to mention, I Two Toed Tom. I had an interaction with Two Toed Tom, and again, it's video games as a medium, as an art form. When I'm having this encounter, I'm seeing everything. I'm seeing the artistry of the environment. I'm seeing the direction of character and motivation. And as this fight is crescendoing, then I'm hit with a perfectly suited Southern song describing the Two-Toed Tom folklore in song form as I'm having this epic battle, and it's all crescendoing into this one, and it's just an amazing experience to have all these different art forms combine as one to tell one fantastic over the top story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that's the beauty of the storytelling itself in the game. And the fact that they honored the telling of the stories and these characters. And I cannot wait to watch more of the playthrough. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I have enjoying watching it, going, oh, I remember talking about that. Oh.
See, you are gonna have a fun time. I can be assured. I can guarantee it. So Donna Washington, you are a professional storyteller, and I wanted to make sure I told people this. If this is at all seemed appealing to you, this conversations that we've been having, you are constantly traveling. I've seen on your website. I've looked at your calendar. You are all over the North Carolina and beyond area. So if you are interested in being immersed in storytelling, I highly suggest you check out DonnaWashington.com and her calendar. Is there anything else that you would like to plug, or where will you be heading in the next couple weeks on your storytelling adventures?
Well, I'm at a number of festivals that you could actually come to, public festivals.
Oh, that's great.
For the next few weeks, yeah. On the 12th, which is this coming Saturday, I don't know when this will be aired, but
time's relative. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I procrastinate a little bit, so.
I'm doing a public show at the Bynum Front Porch, and whether this is aired after or not, if you want some live storytelling, the Bynum Front Porch in Bynum is great. I'm actually going to be on the 18th of April. I'm going to be at the the PSI Theater in Durham, Durham Arts Council, doing a 2-hour show with another storyteller called Voices from the Edge. I'm going to be, in June, I'm going to be in Ocracoke, telling at the Ocracoke Festival. I think a little later on this month in April, I'm going to be in Virginia at the Sounds of the Mountain Festival in Roanoke, I think. So I have a number of public shows at festivals and at venues between now and May. So yeah, just check it out in my calendar. In the summer, I'll be in libraries and also at festivals. And so I'm around.
Yeah. I'm from Baltimore originally, and I even saw that you were in Silver Spring, Maryland not that long ago.
Yes,
so
yes, up in Maryland.
You really make your way around the country. So that's great.
Tennessee in 2 weeks, yes.
Okay. Well, before you go, because you just brought it up, this one event where you're doing it with another storyteller. What is that event like? Are you both telling the same story? Are you characters in a story? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Voices from the Edge was put together because of the idea that we need to hear more voices than the one really loud ones who are telling us what to think and how to feel about what's going on in the world today. So we start with a story that we're telling in tandem, which means one of us starts telling, the other one sort of jumps in, and we tell it together. Then we're having individual stories that form one idea at the very beginning, which is we're all doing our best. And sometimes it doesn't feel like enough, but we're doing our best. And the second act is about what does it look like when you're doing your best? You need to get with other people and create community to get through things. So that's what the two acts are about. In the first act, my co-teller is doing the bulk of the telling, sandwiched by two stories that I'm telling. And in the second act, I'm doing the bulk of the telling, sandwiched by two stories that she's telling. So there, one of the stories that the one we're telling up front together, we're calling it The Elephant and the Parrot, and she starts telling a story from, is it Indonesia, I guess, about an elephant who encounters a hummingbird lying on its back with its little feet up in the air, and the elephant's like, why are you laying on the back? And the hummingbird says, I heard that the sky is going to fall today. I'm going to try to catch it. And the elephant says, you're really small. How are you going to catch a sky? And the hummingbird's like, look, I'm doing the best I can. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And the elephant's like, oh. And the story ends with, I don't know if the elephant did his part, but one thing we're certain of, the sky is still up there. So it's a really short story, sandwiched between a story from the Hindi tradition with a parrot. There's a big fire, and the parrot's flying down and like getting water in his wings and flying back up and like floating over the fire and dropping drops of water. He just keeps this up. And one of the gods is on his way to dinner, and he looks down and he's like, what are you doing? And the parrot's not asking him anything. He's just like answering. He's just keeping to fly up and put water on the fire. And finally, the god just grabs him and says, why are you doing this? You're so small. You can't put this fire out. And the parrot says, I'm doing the best I can. If you're not going to help, get out of the way. And so then the god starts crying and puts the fire out, and then rewards the parrot for his bravery by painting his wings red and blue like flames.
Wow.
So these stories happen inside of each other because they're the same story. And then we move into the kind of stories you like, nonfiction stories that come out of our lives about things where either we or we've been in situations that are scary or terrible and that we have survived. So it's the personal narrative versions of the folk tales that surround the stories.
I love that. I love that I just got a Donna Washington story. I was going to ask you to do it. I was like, I'm not going to ask you to do that, but I got one anyway. This was fantastic. Again, captivating, guys. Captivating. Donna Washington, thank you so much for doing this interview and talking with me today about storytelling in general, South of Midnight, Southern folklore. We ran the gamut. Just thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Well, thank you for having me, Scott. I really have had a really good time. So thank you.
Thank you. And from the WECT Digital Studio, this is Scott Pachillis signing off.